Recording of a lecture on sound art is really a counterintuitive experience to me. And it's a counterintuitive experience of what I found sound art is all about. Right now, I'm sitting, speaking to my computer. The social interaction is only imaginary, and so is the time where the lecture will be performed. I'm sitting in my bedroom. It's different to the one you are in now, and it's different to the one I will be sitting in tomorrow when the lecture will be showed. I'm recording the sound of my own voice, and when I play it back tomorrow, resonant frequencies in the auditorium where I will be with the students will be different. So will it be where the online audience will be situated. I don't know how it will sound in the spaces where it will be played. Will semblances of my speech be destroyed? Will regularities and irregularities be heard or avoided? And how will it actually be listened to? Participants that are familiar with historical references to sound art would probably already think of American Alvin Lucier and his work, I'm Sitting in a Room. So what I just have been saying is actually a rephrase of a canonic piece within sound art, and this is the piece by the American artist.
I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I am going to play it back into the room again and again until the resonant frequencies of the room reinforce themselves, so that any semblance of my speech, with perhaps the exception of rhythm, is destroyed. What you will hear then are the natural resonant frequencies of the room articulated by speech. I regard this activity not so much as a demonstration of a physical fact, but more as a way to smooth out any irregularities my speech might have. I am sitting in a room different from the one you are in now. I am recording the sound of my speaking voice, and I am going to play it back into the room again and again.
So the concept of this piece is that, as Alvin Lucier is revealing in the text itself, is that he plays his own recording into a space, and then he records the resonances of the space. And he does that several times, and I'm just going to move forward. We're not going to hear the whole recording. As you can hear, the semantics of what he's saying is pretty quickly disappearing. And all we can hear is the sound of the spaces, the resonances, and all irregularities are soothed out. I don't hope this is what will happen when I will be speaking tomorrow. Instead, I hope that I will create a listening situation where the participant can be engaged and activated, even though this is a mechanical representation of what I'm doing. While I record this, I do not only concentrate on the performance of my talk, I'm also listening to my own voice, to my breathing, to the sounds from the outdoor, to the ones coming from my neighbors in the apartment. All these sounds are not controllable, but will be part of the situation I'm in right now. My lecture is situated in how and where I'm performing it now, and it's situated academically in what I will present. This little statement also finds resonance actually in the history of sound art. In the work of Pauline Olivier, so we look at it's on the right side of your screen. She's an American composer, and she was also one of the pioneers in the San Francisco electronic music studio. She developed a concept called deep listening, which was both concerning what she called the physical ability of hearing and the consciousness of listening. This was not only a practice or a way of doing listening, deep listening. This was also an ideology of being in the world. One needs to be a good listener to be a good citizen. And to her, it was very important also to stress that listening is very subjective, and it's also related to our subjective abilities of hearing. This, as well as John Cage, who you see on your right, on the left of your screen, and John Cage's seminal work on noise and silence are both really two important anchor points when talking about sound art. Everyday sounds should be paid attention to, John Cage thought, and we should always open the window and listen to what's there, and not always replace it or mask in order to ignore the sounds around us. Their ideas, and of course many, many others, are not only objects for sound art, but also to, and what's related to this lecture series, sound art scholars and sound studies scholars. Besides from their ideas and ideologies, they also offer a lot of methodologies of listening and entrances to the perception of arts and sounds in everyday life. And these entrances are really central both in our study of sound studies or sound phenomena, whether they are within an artistic framework or if they are in a more everyday setting. These two artists, I would say, are close to the practices of the researcher. They do not only let us experience the beautiful in the arts, but they want us to teach about the world, and they want to explore the world with a researcher's systematic entrance, with the curiosity of the researcher, and by doing it through laboratory work or experimentation. So dealing with artworks within the field of sound studies is not really something that's far away from what we do. Jonathan Stern, the Canadian sound studies scholar, even writes this in the foreword to his anthology on sound studies. Sound students problematize sound and the phenomena around it, including their own intellectual tradition. Sound studies is an intellectual exercise, one that for the moment is most grounded in academia through certainly non-academics. Though certainly non-academics produce fascinating work about the sound all the time, and sound students can and should move beyond the academy to try and effect change in the world. Sound studies work is written and spoken, although It can also be imagined and sounded. It is fundamentally a verbal practice because it is about sound. So Jonathan Stern, of course, in some ways he tells us to stay with the academy and the procedures and traditions we have within the academy, but he's definitely also open towards other practices and disciplines and what we can learn from them. And to me, this is obvious when working with sound studies, that we also engage with sound art. And this is what this lecture is about. What can we, as sound studies scholars, learn from a sound artist? How does their work open to new questions of knowledge if we see them in the eye of a researcher? This way of thinking the artist is, of course, not a new thing. If we go back to the history of electroacoustic music, we really see the setting of the composer as researchers and as experimental explorers, you might say. On the top left, we find Knut Wiken, the Swedish pioneer within electroacoustic music. In one of the studios, we see the Danish pioneer in the middle, Else Marie Pade. If I move myself, we have Pierre Schaeffer down here. We have Eimert from the Köln studios, the studios in Cologne. Of Stockhausen, a little blurry, but it is Karlheinz Stockhausen. All these composers, they were doing the music for the future, and the government actually believed them. They thought that the electronic music was the music for the future. In the Nordic countries, and especially in Sweden, this was also part of the whole establishment of the welfare state and folkhemmet, as we say in Sweden. And I think when seeing movies that concern the future today, or science fiction movies, it's not really that far. The sound of the future was defined in the 60s. You can almost see the space shuttle float around in somewhere out in outer space. But this was actually called Summer Morning, and this is made by Knut Wiken, who stands up there. I'm not sure his ideas were exactly the same, but I think in general, you can say that this was definitely music for the future. Not everyone took it so serious as in the European studios. Here is John Cage once again. You see photo shoots or snippets from Water Walk, which was played on national television in 1960. And if you take your time and go to YouTube and watch snippets of this, you will hear an audience that is actually laughing so hard, and John Cage is laughing with them. So this is more like a mysterious composer and a happy composer, suggesting how the sounds of the future could be. So what about today? What is the artist's role as a researcher today? Well, of course, one of the very, very important issues we have today is global warming. The ice is melting and natural catastrophes. A lot of sound artists are actually dealing with this. And the first one here is Janna Vindan. She's a Norwegian artist working. I think she originally is a marine biologist, or at least she is trained as one. And conceptual wise, she works with hydrophones that's basically microphones that she can put into the water and record what's down there. We're just gonna hear a bit of the spring bloom in the marginal ice zone. So what we hear here is really undefinable, I think. It sounds maybe a bit like a cow, but then again, no. And whether we are underwater or not, I'm not really sure about it. Annette Vanse, in her article in the Bloomsbury Handbook of Sound Art, her contribution, chapter 1 in that, she says it's the sound we hear from Janna Vindan is not a pastiche, but sounds that we neither understand nor recognize. So what we actually are listening to is phytoplankton. And those are the plankton that actually produce half of the oxygen on the planet. And that during springtime, the zone here is the most important CO2 sink in our biosphere. So this is really important sounds that we're listening to, or activities. Janna Vindan is giving a voice to what is hard for us human beings up here on land to hear, or to perceive, to understand, or to imagine. She is on the edge of the ice, the melting ice, and she distributes a network of agents, one might say, that are involved in the climate change and the melting Arctic ice. Annette concludes this way in her article, where she, among others, mentions this work and discusses with the term of the Anthropocene. Annette writes, in conclusion, instead of composing the sounds within the frames of the autonomous artwork, These pieces redistribute what can and cannot be heard and what can and cannot be reorganized as significant sounds or even a voice in the political debate. So this artwork actually gives a voice to these pieces that needs to be heard. But they're really hard to hear and really hard to communicate with. And this way, Janna Vindan is bringing an awareness, a tactical awareness and an affective awareness to this part of the global warming issues. Another artist who has also worked a lot with melting ice is Jakob Kirkegaard. But I don't want to stay with that, because even though that we right now think that, well, global warming and COVID-19 are the most important issues on the planet, there are other ways, of course, to explore what's going on here, or other issues that also could be explored. And Jakob Kirkegaard has a long catalogue of different sound artworks where he digs into a phenomenon that he is curious of knowing more about. And then he, without doing an explicit critical statement, without doing an explicit intention, it just sort of reveals the sounds that can be hard for us to hear or hard for us to reach otherwise than through his artwork. And Laboratories is one of the works where he really does this. I heard this work when he demonstrated it at the university in a lecture many years ago. And so in this piece, I will rather use the words of the artist himself from this beautiful book called Earside Out, which presents a lot of Jakob Kirkegaard's works. And in the article about Laboratories, he writes, "It was at the Academy of Media Arts in Cologne, Germany in 2002, while attending a class with Anthony Moore, that I first heard about otoacoustic emissions, the mysterious phenomenon that the ear can actually produce real tones. All my life, I had used my ear listening to the world around me. But would I now be able to listen to my own ears? If the ears could produce sounds, how could I record them? Imagining this instantly blew my mind." So here we actually also find an artist who's asking questions into a phenomenon, like a natural science phenomenon. But then he was like, okay, how can I engage with this in an artistic manner? How can I record this? So as we can read here in the article, Jakob Kirkegaard, he goes through like a lot of experiments, and he tries to deal with this. And he figures out that the whole idea with the concept is that you send in two pure tones, and some people can then generate a third tone from the hair in their ear. And when I experienced this, it was like, so I heard the two tones that he sent out in the speakers, and then I did like this with my head, and then I could catch the third tone and actually feel that it was generated inside my ear. How cool is that? And when he writes about his own experience with this, unfortunately, Jakob himself could not generate the third ear. So, or the third tone. It's not everybody who is able to do that. So what he did was that he had some scientists put a speaker inside his ear and recorded the third tone. And this was the tone that he would send into my ear during the performance or the lecture. And then that his tone in his ear could generate a new tone in my ear. And just in itself, this is a really fascinating piece of art. I really suggest that you give the whole piece a listen and you try to listen into what happens in your ear. It's really, really interesting. He's not only interested in our own insight or the ear, but he has also been producing pieces of Chernobyl or singing sand or big wasteland and the fence in Mexico, the underground in New York. And this is kind of a different concept where he puts on little microphones, like contact mics, and sense the vibration of all these various places. But I'm not going to go into these pieces, even though they're very beautiful too. I want just to show a bit from a piece that is very new, and it is actually still exhibited at Munkerup Hus up in northern part of Zealand in Denmark. It's called Opus Potesco, and here he is actually recording the sound of our own mortality. He's recording bodies that are rotting, and he has visited the Forensic Anthropology Center at Texas State University in USA, or what's also called the Body Farm. And just 5 millimeters above these bodies, he has recorded the process that these bodies is now going through. And this is my own poor recording of that I will just show you a snippet of. This piece is a really beautiful setting. You could hear the bees. They were the recordings from the site, because there were definitely no bees when I was there. So those are the bees next to the bodies where he did the original recordings. But what you also hear is the rain that started while I was there, and you can hear the ocean and some birds flocking around. And this really gave a very organic experience of this piece. I'm just gonna select this. Okay, so this opens towards another scene that we're not yet familiar with, and it opens towards imaginaries that we might not think of if it wasn't for the artist or the sound artist that could go into dialogue with this. Jakob's own intentions behind this. This is about the piece about global warming. He says, I did not want to create a piece that directly commented on global warming, but to provide a way for the visitors who simply listen to and absorb this phenomena to experience and reflect on the constant flux of nature's inexorable forces. So, and this is what, every time I speak to him, every time he goes into this, he says, no, I'm not political. No, I do not want to tell you something, like preach something. But he just wants us to be, maybe I would say, affected from these phenomena, and then maybe make sure that we are embodied in them, and then maybe take action from that. It's really hard to ignore his work after seeing it or experiencing it. So this is also what we will try to do in 2 weeks, the Sound Environment Center during the Futures Week at Lund University, we will have a seminar on underwater sounds where we have microbiologists and an artist and a curator coming down to give a seminar on what happens to the ecologies of the ocean when noise pollution is really a current problem. So in the entrance of Skissernes Museum, where we will have the seminar, we have invited Tove Møller, an artist from Stockholm, to do a work called In Light of Flowing Circumstances. And here she will, just like Janna, not like Janna Vindan, of course, in a different matter, but she has invited the ocean, the ocean, the mirror, the brook, the plash, and the river. She has invited them for a little conference too, and make them speak to one another. And she does that with different speakers in the foyer. And again, maybe this will open for new voices that are really hard to speak to right now, the voices that we know are very important to listen to, but we don't really know the language yet, and we don't really know how to speak to them. So maybe this step or this setting can help us imagine further ways to communicate with the natural environment around us or the natural phenomena around us. We also have another installation during the Futures Week, and that's the Sound Bench, where Robert Willem, an ethnologist from Kulturvetenskaper på Lund University, he has produced a work. The bench itself is designed by Audiorama in Stockholm, and we are hiring it for a few weeks. And Robert will reflect on what does it mean to take a seat? What does it mean to take a seat in the government? What does it mean that we always sit when we do research? Why is all this with the sitting? And so he will reflect that through a sound composition, but there will also be semantic words that can help us in his reflection on this phenomena. This is a very like a site-specific work, as it is about sitting while sitting. And I guess this is the original idea he did. So in this work, he also refers to Alvin Lucia in the beginning. I was stressing the fact that Alvin Lucia is exploring resonance and what happens if we play the same sound into the same space again and again. But Robert Willem is reflecting what's Alvin Lucia actually sitting on. He's sitting in a room, but no one has never asked, what is he sitting on? How is he sitting? And this is Robert's take into that historical work. Both artistic works are very situated. And this is what I think is maybe not all sound artists would say that their sound art is situated or site specific, but I think from the listener's position, they really are. And I think this is the way we should approach sound art. We should not try to make it into music or make it as an autonomous artwork. Sound art, this is where it differs from music. Sound art is here to engage with the world and is engaging with the world. And this is how we have been working in the book, the handbook on sound art that came out on Bloomsbury in February. I did it together with my colleague Holger Schulze from the University of Copenhagen. And here we define sound art this way. This is an awful slide with a lot of quotes. So the sound artist find interest in sound as a medium, not as a metaphor. To the sound artist, sound is not beyond human control. It is neither a pure abstraction nor a metaphysical phenomenon, and it's not separated from phenomena outside the artistic work, the music culture, or the art world. Most sound artists are interested in sound that is already given. That is noise, electronic sine tones, sound waves, or natural phenomena, sound generated by a musical instrument from a field recording or by a human voice. And this is all also present in the examples that I have shown. Sound artists reconstruct and deconstruct such sounds, or simply bring them forward and present them in a performance, an installation, or recording, in order to make the non-perceivable perceivable, or the unnoticed noticed. Sound art is explicitly entangled and engaged in phenomena, physicalities, and social-cultural aspects present at the time when the work is made. And this is how I mean that sound art is highly situated. It's always entangles itself into the museum, the recording, the institution, the performance where it is performed or where it is exhibited. And if we approach it as such, as a voice among others, and is open to what it tries to tell us or what it tries to show us, what it tries to reveal to us, I think such imaginaries is really important also in the process of research and academic, more traditional, pure academic, theoretical research. Because the sound art and the sound artist can expand our imaginaries. It can help us bring in new questions. And it can help us to understand, but it definitely can also help us maybe to grasp what we do not understand. So thank you so much for listening along. And I really look forward to having a discussion with you guys now. Thank you.